Captain Picard, Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
My Readier Room.
And welcome to the Readier Room, not to be confused with The Orb. This is the only TNG rewatch podcast with actual on-set insights from those who are there to see the magic happen. My name is Mitchell Mells, Chief Consultant of Services to the Stars at Paramount Industries back at the 80s, and alongside me is my life partner Brandon Hobbs, Head of Resources Management, who I worked alongside then and now. Together, we're here to recap the show that we love and share some nuggets of unknown behind-the-scenes lore and data along the way. Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mitchell. It's great to be here. It's great to be talking about the show again.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
It's a trip down memory lane, really. And I mean, obviously, we were there on the set the whole time, but it's completely different watching it. Watching the finished product, which. I mean, even back then, I don't think I watched every single episode.
Right, I don't think anybody did, except like the hardcore Trekkies, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean the real the real fans, right? Which, I mean, just being on set, there was an episode here and there where you kind of got the full picture just by watching it play out. But going back and watching the show as it is now, so many memories coming back. It's been great.
It really just felt like it was time, It was time to have a TNG rewatch podcast.
Right, because no one's ever done this before.
Right. I mean,
we're breaking new ground here.
It's new ground, and hopefully we can share some new information along the way. My hope is that everybody who listens to this podcast comes away with it thinking, wow, I didn't know that. This is really exciting, because the true magic is what was off the camera, Anybody who was involved in a production will tell you that.
Exactly, and I personally hope that we can. This is going to be a service to the fans. I hope the fans are really going to enjoy this.
A love letter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so like all good things, I suppose. See what I did there?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
You got to start at the beginning. And the beginning for TNG is Encounter at Farpoint Station, Episode 1 and 2, otherwise known as the pilot, which is a truly fascinating place to start with for the next generation for Star Trek. You can watch it with these two different points of view. You can watch it thinking, like, this is a brand new product, another installment of this franchise, but I don't really know very much about it, these characters, whatever. Or you can watch it with the foreknowledge of where it goes and where it ends and what TNG is as a whole, and this is just how it's beginning. And depending on your point of view, it really works or doesn't work in a number of different ways, which I think the ways it doesn't work are more interesting to me. So the first place I want to start it is by talking about the characters in this episode, because this is our introduction to them, and the characters are such a focal point of TNG as a whole. And when you're introduced to so many of the characters here, and you have the again, that foreknowledge of what they become, it's almost baffling in a way. And nowhere is this more clear than with Picard. So what did you think of Picard's introduction, where we see him?
Really? Because Picard, I was going to say, I thought Picard was the most consistent.
What? Really?
Yeah. What did you think was wrong with Picard?
Well, they do establish some of Picard's character traits that carry through the whole series. For example, like, Picard doesn't like children, or he's not good with them. Whatever. He's kind of bristly. He bristles. And yeah, it's like, I understand where that came from now. But at the same time, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say that his hatred of children, in particular, that being a defining character trait, that was a little on the nose when Picard turns and looks at the camera and says, "I don't like children."
He does call Riker into his Ready Room explicitly to tell him, by the way, I don't like children. And
right.
Yeah.
Very, very expository kind of scene that I don't know. It was a little heavy-handed, but sorry. Continue.
The thing is, though, that everybody has a pretty well-known fondness for Jean-Luc Picard. Like, he's one of the more well-liked captains of the whole franchise. And when you see him here, he's like this crotchety old man who's just like an asshole to everybody, and he's not really likable in many ways. Nor is he particularly ingenious or good in a jam. Like, the events of this episode kind of play out without him really doing a whole bunch. Like, an away team goes and they discover everything and they come back and tell Picard, and it's like one obvious conclusion. So if he's not going to be likable and he's not going to be productive or efficient, it's like, what is he doing as captain? Like, why should I care about him? And he's not like even super good looking either to salvage it that way. I don't think Picard really has a likable trait on display in this episode, unless you also really hate children and just want to relate to him on that.
Well, I think a lot of his agency was kind of pulled away from his character with the inclusion of Q. Just by the nature of how, as we'll see in the future, how episodes with Q tend to go. Not only because of the way his character is written, but because of the strange influence Delancey has on the scripts for each of those episodes.
It's like I almost hesitate to talk about it because I don't want to ruin the Delancey magic. I know he is quite the following amongst.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say for good reason, but for a reason, sure.
Yeah, it's. So I mean, we promised to give you guys the lore, and lore can be good, lore can be bad, lore can be exciting, and it can be baffling. And there is a little bit of John Delancey lore that I believe is worth sharing. When we first meet Q, he shows up uninvited on the bridge of the Enterprise, and he's like changing all of these costumes that he's wearing between different time points of human history. What many people don't know is that all of those costume changes were not scripted at all. Delancey showed up on set with his own wardrobe, like a large suitcase. Yeah. And every time we would rap on a few lines of dialogue, he would just storm off the set, begin changing, not a word to anybody.
He insisted. He was so insistent on dressing up for these scenes. Like, that was never written into the script at all.
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but the people from wardrobe would come up to him and be like, Mr. Delancey, we actually wanted you to, wear this. And he would scoff at them and just, as if he didn't even hear them, just keep going with what he was doing. The only pushback that we were successful in getting was we were able to cut the scene where he dressed up as a 1940s SS officer because of how angry it had made Gene at the time. But everything else was allowed in the final cut. And, in some ways, I think it really shaped where Q ultimately went as a character. So
Right, because initially he was a much more, I guess, threatening kind of antagonist.
Right, whereas the silliness and the playfulness.
Delancey gave him a bit of flamboyance.
Definitely.
Which, I mean, to be fair, it made him a better character for sure, but it led to quite a few rewrites.
Yeah.
And a little bit of tension on the set, for sure.
Whenever it was a Delancey, a Q episode, I should say, the mood was markedly different on set.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and not only that, but if people had to bend over backwards for, I don't know, because of a lot of his little eccentricities, right?
Right.
I mean, you remember in this episode, right, the trial scene. And Q's the judge. He's wearing that kind of flamboyant, I don't know, jester-looking outfit.
It was like bright red and black.
I don't know if you remember this, but he showed up on set that day wearing it, he actually made that costume himself. He didn't take it off the entire day.
I do
He
think
came
I
and
remember
left
that.
in that costume. Yeah, absolutely bizarre. I have no idea what this guy does in his free time. But so anyway, my point is he's sitting on that moving platform, right? And he kind of like descends towards Picard and everyone. And actually, kind of an ingenious little mechanism behind this platform. It's really just three guys pushing and pulling these levers around to get him to go up and down. And between shoots, Delancey would kind of just sit on top of that platform and bark orders at these three guys, telling him to, go faster, go back, spin him around, do a 180. Absolutely insane. And they had to sit there and just put up with it. They really earned their paycheck that day.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that was part of the overall effect that Delancey had on everybody. Especially once he established himself as Q, like a force that's going to be around, he had a lot more rope and certainly ran with it.
Right. I mean, yeah, especially as the show went on, because how can you have TNG without Q?
Exactly. And I ultimately had a Voyager without Q. He just kept popping up in different Star Trek places.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he kind of became his own little celebrity within this microcosm of TV. And he definitely acted the part.
He was able to parlay that into a permanent spot on the My Little Pony show. So really good for Delancey.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Lots of Star Trek fans migrated to that show.
Definitely. But that courtroom scene is also worth talking about. There's not a lot in TNG that comes close to mirroring just how baffling it is to watch that scene. It's because there's so many reasons that it like takes you out of, I was gonna say otherworldliness, but really Star Trek is all about going to other worlds. That doesn't quite work, but it just has a different tone than everything else. Like even the way the camera is positioned, like, all the shots are kind of askew.
At some point, there's one shot where like the cameraman's hand is clearly in view of the camera.
I forgot about that. Oh my, yeah. We just kept going on about that. Like no one noticed it at the time.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That scene just in general. I mean, watching it on TV, it feels like it's part of a different show.
It really does.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna comment on. I mean, I think one of the more jarring casting decisions was in that scene. And definitely not one of our proudest moments.
Yeah.
As TNG crew, but we had these little people dressed as like bums, and I guess they were supposed to be Oriental.
Yeah, and they were like they were supposed to be mutated nuclear war survivors.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Gene wanted them to look like descendants of people who had been through a nuclear war. So, we recruited most of them from a special needs halfway home. Yeah, and that was only out of necessity because, given the, I guess, copious amounts of makeup and prosthetics the other characters needed, makeup just did not have the bandwidth for this number of extras. So we kind of just had to find. Gene called them naturals.
It was really unfortunate, but you can kind of see where they were coming from. Most episodes of Star Trek do not involve this amount of extras unless they're like just plain looking humans wearing, regular clothes. Very rarely do you have to have. There was like 2 full bleachers just full of extras. It was really ambitious.
It was a lot. It was, and you never even see like that many Klingons. Right. Like even in the Klingon episodes.
The smell on set that day, pretty wild.
It was trying. I wish I was in Delancey's seat at the top.
There's a lot of debate about that scene because of how they had chosen to structure it. If you recall, the Enterprise separates, the saucer separates. They do a saucer separation. Let's talk about that real quick.
Let's talk about the saucer separation. That's right.
Rewatching this, there was so much time dedicated to the saucer separation. A good 2 to 3 minutes of screen time of just the saucer separating and characters looking expectantly as waiting for it to separate. And I don't know if this was supposed to be a special effects showcase, because obviously when you're on set, the special effects are made elsewhere. You don't see that being done live. But seeing the finished product, it's such a waste of screen time. Like, I don't know if they were forced into making this a 2-parter and they had to make up like 10 minutes here and there or what, but it is really trying to sit through.
No, yeah, and the saucer separation itself, I don't feel has ever been a defining trait of the Enterprise in any way.
Right.
I can't remember. I know they do it again, but I can't remember in what context.
I know they often have debates, like when something's going wrong with the ship. It's like, we have to separate the saucer, and they're like, no, if you separate the saucer, all these people will die. And
they never do it.
Right.
So which makes you wonder why they did it this time, because they've been in worse situations and not done that.
I think most of the why questions in the first episode, or really the first season, are just, we need to establish that this can do that. We need to establish that the saucer can separate, so we have to separate it.
No, that's fair. But
But it didn't have to take 3 minutes.
Right. No, I think you're right in that they needed some filler. Because I guess this is just an issue with the story of the episode as a whole. It's very bland. Doesn't really go anywhere. And even considering that, the saucer separation still brought the episode to a grinding halt. Very weird stuff.
You sit through it and you have these moments of the saucer separating. You have these moments of like Riker running around the holodeck for 3 minutes, and
which apparently he had never been in.
Right, Riker's supposed to be this, not like an old veteran, but he is seasoned. He served on starships before. He has a history.
He's the Kirk analog. He's the Kirk analog.
And we're supposed to believe that he's never seen a holodeck before.
Right. He has to be taught by Wesley Crusher.
And Data.
Yeah. Who? Never mind. Never. It's very, very weird stuff. But you were going to talk about the court scene. Yeah.
So, in some respects, I like the court scene. Just to give my opinion on it first, I think that courtrooms work well with what Star Trek TNG does. It's
definitely,
it's solving a problem through talking and reasoning and argumentation, which, especially Picard, really works well for. I mean, you have Riker in the courtroom, good maybe it won't go so well.
It's a good concept. I mean, humanity is on trial.
Right.
It's a good concept.
Well, that's just the thing. Humanity is on trial, and if you look at the characters that are in the courtroom scene, you have Jean-Luc Picard, human; Natasha Yar, human; Troy, Betazoid, not quite human, but maybe a little bit, half human actually, half human. She's a half Betazoid, and Data, who's an android and not at all human, as much as he wishes he was. Now, you might be saying, well, they just beamed aboard everybody who was on the separated Enterprise because those were the people in the bridge and the control room, and they just went on trial. But that's not entirely true, because the 4 of them are on the Enterprise, but there's a 5th person with them. His character name is Colm. He later becomes O'Brien. He's also there with everybody, but he does not get beamed aboard for this humanity trial. Instead, they opt to take the android, Data. And we often asked questions about this on the set. Everybody noticed it immediately. And I went to Gene directly that day, and I asked him, it's like, well, Data's not really a good representative of humanity. I mean, being that he's not human. Why isn't Colm there with him? And Gene looks at me, he's like, oh, that Mick bastard, human? And he just kind of walked away after that.
Yeah.
It never came up in the show, and I'm glad that controversy never got to rear its head. But it's difficult watching that scene now, knowing the justification and the reasoning behind it. And everybody is teleported back to the ship. Combs is sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, saucer separation was a success," or whatever. He gives like some status update, and I wish you could have been there, buddy. I think you're human. It's a shame.
Yeah, I don't think Gene ever actually interacted with that actor face to face.
No, whenever his scenes were being shot, Gene would always go into the green room or take a smoke, find some excuse to walk outside.
Yeah, and we kind of, the crew all kind of had to just be okay with it.
Yeah. Star Trek is always hailed as being this, inclusive thing. You look at the crew of the original series, you have a black, some whites, an Asian of some sort. But that was always at the behest of the writers. Gene's vision was quite different from that. But to pitch it to the networks, who were quite progressive at the time, they needed to have this multicultural, inclusive angle to it. And Gene just wanted his sci-fi to get made. And if that had to be at odds with his personal views, then so be it. Really. It was a means to an end. He didn't have to like it, but he did have to tolerate it. Right. Yeah. And go ahead.
You kind of see the writers here carrying that same torch, where the original Star Trek was very much about, well, not about, but it was celebrated for its depiction of kind of racial harmony, right?
Right. It had, quote unquote, the first interracial kiss on television.
Right. And I guess in the same way, this series is kind of a celebration of neuroatypical people.
Yeah,
right.
I see what you mean.
Right. So because each member of the bridge, I mean, except for the white men, which Gene was adamant about them being, quote, neurotypical.
Right.
Each member of the bridge kind of has their own neurological disorder, right? Data has, I guess, an autism analog, right? Geordi is blind. Worf suffers from BPD. And that's why when you get to Troy,
yeah,
it starts to get interesting, because she's a betazoid, right? She's a telepath. She's an empath, right?
She's got some mind power,
which basically does just come down to her being a telepath,
right? When the story needs her to be,
right, and that's it. I think she gets a lot of criticism from fans or watchers of the show for how convenient or how convenient her powers are in terms of being able to take her out of a story or put her back into it. And like, her powers just kind of like don't matter sometimes, or they don't work sometimes. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that she is neuroatypical for a betazoid. You see what I'm saying? And it's not really said in so many words because it's obviously a fictional race.
Well, more light is shed on that in later seasons and later episodes where you meet other betazoids and you see how they act compared to Troy. And it's always different. Right.
And yeah, you come to the slow realization that Troy's a little bit slow.
Right. Well,
so
slow for betazoid and slow for human have different things going on, which is why she's able to serve on this mostly human crew. Whereas in Betazoid society, everyone just kind of mocks her for using her for talking instead of using exclusively telepathic communication.
Right. That's a great point. And it's also why she kind of presents, I guess, as a normal human being. And what's always been interesting to me is that I mean, obviously, as you know, Data was conceived as, I guess, kind of a stand-in for the fans.
Yes, yes. I
Right?
distinctly remember hearing this during the conceptualization of the series.
Right, right. It was the idea that God, Gene had gone to obviously several conventions by this point and kind of gotten a feel for like who the fans were,
Mm,
and was pretty into the idea of creating this stand-in character of Data, who had autism, much like many of the fans, and had difficulty understanding complex emotional issues.
right.
You know, um, even moral issues, the moral issues the show brings up. So it was this contrast between Data and Troy. Data, who had autism, and Troy, who was an empath and could sit there and explain things to Data. Right?
And
So
thus
in many
explaining
ways,
them to the audience.
yes, in many ways, Troy is actually the audience's mother.
Ah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So,
Right.
what's the real stroke of genius here is that Data he's not an autistic human. He's an android who is basically, for all intents and purposes, a sufferer of autism. But he's not actually. And the reason that this is genius is because Gene always makes it clear in his series Bibles, right? Like the overlay of what the franchise is going to be. That by this point, humanity has employed eugenics enough to breed out things like autism and other low desirable traits, such that
he was a fan of eugenics.
Right.
He was a fan of eugenics.
Such that they don't exist
Gene...
anymore. But if you want to say, how do we have an autistic character when that clashes with Gene's vision of the future? Well, you make an android. You make somebody who is literally a robot instead of, metaphorically. So it's a really, really good idea on the writer's part to write
absolutely
it that way.
Genius.
Yeah, genius. Haha.
Oh.
Oh, so there's the whole Betazoid thing. There's one thing that's special about them. You look at Klingons; they have their foreheads. You look at the Ferengi; they have their big ears. The Betazoids also have a distinct trait about them, but some people don't even notice it. Like, do you remember what makes the Betazoids special? What sets them apart?
Oh my God! Give me a second. Did they have something like that?
They did. So all the Betazoids in the series, starting with Troy in this episode, and every single one that pops up afterwards, they all have black eyes, like pitch black eyes. You look at Data, he's got yellow eyes. The Betazoids have black eyes. Now, I know what you're thinking, in that's a really, really low impact physical difference. And like I said, most people don't even notice it at first. And that's true. Initially, they had wanted to make something a little more, intense, like give them kind of like a enlarged frontal lobe to connect with their telepathy and empathy. But makeup, like we were saying, they were quite inundated at the time. They did not have the resources to make that for the pilot. So somebody, I forget their name, but they really innovated here. They took one of Data's yellow contacts that they had prepared, and they took a magic marker and colored it black. And like, this is going to be the Betazoid. And the thing is, like, Troy is half human, so it's okay if her physical difference is a little smaller, and that was their rationale. Right. But we didn't have time to secure, like, actual black contact lenses in time for the pilot. So we had to use those Data ones that were covered over in black magic marker. But the thing is that, the black marker dries out.
That can't be good.
No, it dries out the contact lenses, and when Marina Sirtis was wearing them, she would often tear up because of the pain that the dry contact lenses were putting on her eyes. Now, this is like an accidental genius moment, because the only time in the pilot where the camera is zoomed in on Troy, and you can notice this, is when she's having one of her empath scenes, like when she's supposed to be connecting with the mind of somebody else.
Right.
So those tears look like she's so overcome with the emotion of whatever she's connecting with empathically. And it's an accident, but it worked to the show's benefit in an amazing way. And the thing about Marina Sirtis is that she can't cry on command. We would often ask her to do it throughout different episodes of the show that focused on Troy.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, she was a little bit limited in that respect. But when you can make it happen artificially and use that to your. It's just magic. That's TV magic.
That is definitely TV magic. Yeah, I noticed Marina crying on I distinctly remember this because I noticed Marina crying on the set quite a bit in the filming of this episode. But I always kind of just chalked it up to the I guess you might call them inappropriate advances from both Delancey and Gene at the same time.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the darker parts of this show's history, but it's something that was there from the beginning and never quite cooled off.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just, especially when Delancey would come back, obviously, as we already talked about, the atmosphere of the whole set would change, and that was one of those aspects. But having Gene here for the whole season,
oh my god,
definitely did not help with that. And you know, going full speed into this pilot with both of them. I mean,
a pilot is already tense just because it's a new thing. You're with new coworkers. You have a deadline, especially for a double feature pilot, and to add this stress on, Jesus Christ! Could you imagine if Gene was around for season 6 with how that production went? Oh my god!
Oh my god! I don't think we would have made it. I think that would have been it. That would have been it for the show. That's it.
I don't mean to celebrate the man's death, but
no, not at. I mean, there were plenty of great things about him. You know, in the same way that there were great things about Delancey as well, but you know, everyone has their faults. Everyone has their faults.
When you have such a unique and almost inspiring vision to a lot of people, you get a lot more room to play with. You know, you don't.
Yeah, exactly. People are a little more want to kind of excuse your eccentricities like that.
Like,
and you know, plus it was a different time.
It was. But imagine if like LeVar showed up to set and like he was the one doing all. He would have been gone in a second. It's like,
that would have been it.
Some random blind guy, you're out of here.
That would have been it.
Yeah.
But you remember the season 1 outfits, right? For the women.
Jesus Christ, do I remember those? Of course I remember.
There's another Gene story. It's obviously another Gene story.
Yeah, I mean,
he was so insistent. He was so insistent that all of the women on the starship wear these like high skirt, like go-go boots uniforms.
It's ridiculous even by sci-fi standards. Like, there's no way you can justify this.
Absolutely not. Just the way that, and I mean, maybe it was a holdover from classic Trek, but I think audience tastes by then had kind of leveled this out. But I don't even think anyone on the production team even liked them. But Gene was over the moon for these things.
He wouldn't let it go.
Do you remember Denise Crosby? Do you remember Denise Crosby?
This is such I feel so bad for her. Like, how... You go on.
You tell it.
All right. So Denise Crosby, if you don't know, she plays Tasha Yar. First day of shooting, everybody, get the makeup, they go to costume, wardrobe, they show up, and at some point, Gene stops by the set. He was a little bit late that day, but it's whatever. He didn't want to stick around if makeup was going to take an extra long time, so he comes late. And he sees the cast. And, they're all meeting, greeting, doing handshakes. And then he sees Denise. And he looks at her in that uniform with the high skirt and the boots. And the revulsion on his face was immediately apparent. Didn't even make an attempt to hide it. Like, everybody else in the room could feel, like, the tension between the two of them, Denise and Gene. And all Gene could say was a curt request to go change into one of the men's uniforms with the pants and the long sleeve shirts. And she, professional, didn't say a word. She just went to go change. If she felt hurt by the incident, didn't make it known. I know she's talked about a little bit of this at conventions, saying how part of the reason she left the show was all of the enmity between her and Gene. And I think that's where it really started. There's also a little bit of envy
and how
there.
could it not?
What was that?
I was just going to say, how could it not?
Yeah. There's a little bit of envy between how tense her relationship with Gene was and all of the love and adoration and advances he would shower on Marina. And
right.
What some people know, this is kind of a well-known anecdote, is that the two of them actually auditioned for each other's roles, and then Gene switched them. So that initially
Oh.
Marina Sirtis auditioned to play the security officer, and Denise had auditioned to play the ship's counselor. And Gene thought that the other ones would be better in each other's roles. And it's quite a deep web of interactions right there. And it's not very clean. You can see why Denise was kind of pushed out of the show. Once Gene died, we started bringing her back in different guest spots, which she was happy to do. But yeah, it was a rough road getting there.
Right. And I mean, no matter which one of them he was interacting with on set that day, whether it was Denise or whether it was Marina, I think we as the crew were consistently taken aback with his behavior.
Yeah, a lot of tongue biting, I would say.
yeah, definitely. A lot of awkward looking around at each other, trying to catch each other's eyes.
Yeah, it was a shared moment of like, are you seeing this? Like, for real?
Yeah.
Incredulity, whatever. Incredulousness?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Incredulity?
I suppose. But it was a feeling that was shared amongst everybody. But, when you're the boss, you're the boss. And Gene was the boss. More ways than one.
Oh, yes, he was.
So he had an unreal amount of influence over the show. One of the more controversial aspects of TNG was the character of Wesley Crusher. To this day, people are still in forums and Reddit posts bemoaning Wesley Crusher's.
There's a lot of hate. A lot of hate.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, it's a Wesley episode, it sucks, or like, oh, why is this stupid kid talking, like, whatever. But the origin story of that character, Gene at the time was seeing this woman, and as a way of like currying favor with her, he said, oh, your son's an actor, I can make a role for him on my television series. And wouldn't you know it, that role ultimately became Wesley Crusher. It was very transparent on set. The writers had finished the script, and they were ready, and they were working on future scripts for the series. And everything was ready to go into production when Gene comes in and says, guys, we got to add this new character for this random teen actor who nobody's ever heard of before, but he's going to be on our major network show for some reason. Everybody knew what the story was. Around the writer's room, instead of, referring to him as Boss Man, as he usually liked to be called, everybody started using the nickname Gene Roddenberry for his sexual proclivities with women. That's
right.
It's amazing. But you're a paid professional. You just go along with it. That's a running theme amongst Star Trek: The Next Generation's early production is just deal with it.
Yeah. These early episodes, they were fun to make in their own ways because of how ridiculous it could get.
Yeah,
and ridiculous in a way that only Gene could bring. But
go ahead.
Yeah, you go.
I was gonna say, one of the more ridiculous things about the early TNG, where Gene had the most influence, was how they would try to ramp up the sci-fi by using like fake words and fake titles for the characters. And a great example of this is in Encounter at Farpoint, where we meet like the leader of this satellite nation, and he's called like the Groppler. His name's Groppler.
The Groppler.
Yeah, the Groppler.
Right.
And instead of being the president or the governor, whatever, he's a Groppler. And later TNG does not do any of this. Like, all the ships, if they're Romulan, Klingon, whatever, they all have captains. They have, like, chancellors instead of Gropplers. It's a really lazy way of creating an alien atmosphere. And it doesn't even make sense in the lore of the show when you're like, oh, everybody's got these universal translators, so... It's like,
exactly, yeah. I mean, we'll see that rule broken quite a bit, of course, but yeah, I mean, Groppler sounds like a Muppet.
It does.
I'm not really sure what he was thinking there, but
and it's one letter off from grappler, like a wrestler. There's a lot of questions that it leaves.
It's a little too on the nose. Whatever that nose may be, no one will ever know.
No, but the nose knows. So,
but
The another nitpicky thing that I kind of want to talk about, because I'm a nitpicker and I like to pick nits. The whole thrust of this episode is that the Q continuum via Q is going to test and put humanity on a trial for being quote unquote savage. And
Right.
when you hear this, or when I hear this, all I think about is, well, what about the other races of the galaxy? Did they put the Klingons on trial for being a savage race? How did that go?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because the Klingons should obviously... I mean, the Klingons are just human, like, barbarians.
Right.
They're like an analog to, like, a tribe of humans.
Regardless of their sophistication, they're definitely savage. I mean, they solve everything 100%. By combat.
Yeah.
And it's a symptom of this, like, focus on humanity thing that permeates Star Trek TNG.
Yeah.
Like, everything is always done and focused on humans via
it's
Picard.
that conflict between the human race in Star Trek as a whole being presented as, you know, moving past prejudice, past the need for money, and that kind of thing. It's the conflict of that, with the fact that they need to make a show where moral dilemmas are presented rather.
Right.
And by all accounts, every single other race in the galaxy should have been judged before humanity. Like, humanity does virtually nothing wrong compared to, the Romulans, the Klingon.
Right.
Right? The Ferengi.
All we see of the humans are how they're always the poor victim of somebody else's intergalactic sabotage or whatever, you know?
Exactly.
And suddenly they're the savages. Like, I get it, this is a show shown to humans, so humans have to relate to it, and you can't... It's hard to relate to the struggles of, a race of, like, sentient gas. You know, I get it. But Star Trek is also, like, a pretty heady sci-fi series that tries its best to make some amount of sense. It's not like an action show with sci-fi trappings. It's actual science fiction. So my expectations are higher for something like this. But
right.
It's things like this take me out of it completely.
I think they deal with this particular problem much better going forward, because I think the issue here is, again, with the Q character, where he just kind of suddenly shows up in front of Picard, ready to judge humanity, whereas most of the other kind of moral dilemmas presented with that theme in mind tend to begin with, like, the Enterprise entering some kind of contested space or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they
instigate
not necessarily sought it out, they instigated it. Exactly. And not intentionally, but that's where the conflict comes in.
That makes sense.
In this case, they just didn't do anything. Like, no one did anything, and Q just showed up. And for Q to be this omniscient entity that can do anything and judge humans in a particular way versus, again, the Klingons, it doesn't really make much logical sense within its own world.
What really adds insult to injury is how inconsequential the whole trial and testing humanity thing is, because no part of Q's meddling nor what Picard learns during that process impacts how the crew handles the situation that they're confronted with. Like, they have this encounter at Farpoint Station, and whether or not Q had showed up, the crew would likely have all done the exact same things that they did. And it robs this trial of all of its weight. Now, the writers learned from this, and, like, the best example of this being done correctly is at the very end of the series, and what I'm sure is an intentional parallel. But yeah, this time it just felt like these events were fated to play out this way, rather than somebody learning something and changing. And that means there's no progression, there's no real arc. It's just a bunch of rather boring series of events, and then two jellyfish pop out.
Right. And Q begs Picard to
Yeah.
shoot them.
That was the most disappointing part. Once they're solving the issue and like humanity is clearly going to be kind and redeem themselves, instead of like just accepting things or really anything, because really what is Q's motivation here? He becomes like a petulant child just begging Picard to fall into a trap in the most non-clever, obvious way possible, when really as an omniscient being, Q should kind of be above emotions in general. And
he never really acts like that going forward. He's just like, if Picard quote wins, he's just like, whatever,
right,
it's fine, and then he leaves.
Yeah, and it's just so jarring. I don't know if this is colored by knowing where the Q character goes, but I do like to think that anybody just watching only this episode will also look at that moment a bit strange. Like, why is basically a god here just on his knees begging somebody to make a mistake? It's like, if you're omniscient,
again, it's another.
You couldn't be more clever about this. Like, I get trying to poison the well or rig things in your favor, but this is like the least clever way of doing that. It's really dumb.
Yeah, and like you said, the narrative really goes nowhere. I guess it's kind of just an introduction to these characters, but
you didn't need,
the fact that it was a two-parter.
Right, you didn't need 2 parts to introduce all of the characters. You might have needed 2 episodes, but you didn't need to make it one story of doing that when the story that you have does not lend itself to that amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, it goes so far as to make you think why this show got picked up to begin with.
Oh yeah.
It's easily one of the worst episodes of TV I've ever watched.
And this season is basically the worst season of the show.
Yes. Well, we all know why that is.
But when you're the viewer and you're at home and you're like, oh, what do I tune into tonight? You don't know the backstory of why these things went this way.
Right. You don't make concessions for that.
Right. You just think, wow, this show kind of sucks. I'm not going to watch it.
Yeah.
So yeah. I think Star Trek The Next Generation really benefited from being a Star Trek property rather than just like Space Force 5 or whatever. Some random thing without a franchise attached to it. People who grew up on Star Trek had nostalgia for it. They probably looked at TNG with a lot softer eyes. So thank God for that, though.
Thank God for that. Kept us employed, huh?
I was going to say, it was nice to not go poor for the 7-8 year span. Do you have anything else you want to add on Encounter at Farpoint Station?
I don't think I do. Do you have any more behind the scenes stuff?
I got one, and it's the silliest thing you can imagine, and it's almost embarrassing in a way how basically everybody in the crew was culpable to this. So the first draft and almost the final draft, what was supposed to be the final draft of the script, throughout that whole run, the title of it was Encounter at Nearpoint Station. And the idea was that this was a space station that was in our solar system, like the real our solar system, and it was very close to Earth. And the story was basically the same, but it would take place just close to Earth for whatever reason. And everybody thought this was okay. And then Delancey shows up on set to shoot things, and he's reading the script again after he memorized it, and he's just kind of voicing out loud his thoughts, and he's like, really? Encounter at Nearpoint Station, they can go anywhere in the galaxy and they're still in the solar system? And everybody on set kind of had this collective moment of, oh yeah, and then it was hastily rewritten right there. So
I mean, never say Gene doesn't have his moments, right?
Right. If we're gonna, shed some of the dirty laundry of other people, we gotta talk about how we ourselves are also culpable in not bringing this up earlier. So
of course,
yeah, egg was on our face too that time. But hopefully that's a little bit of levity to end things, and that will about do it for this first episode of the Readier Room. I implore everybody to join us next time where we tackle episode 2 of season 1. And until then, everybody, stay ready.
The troublesome little man-child.
Consider that in the history of many worlds, there have always been disposable creatures.
Do you consider yourself superior to us?
Should have told him to mind his own damn business.
But I stroked the beard thusly. Do I not appear more intellectual?
Computer! Freeze program.
It's not a promising beginning.